There's a specific type of morning you know intimately, even though you've never spoken about it with anyone. You wake up and for a few precious seconds, you forget that something changed inside you over the past weeks or months. Then consciousness returns, bringing with it the peculiar sensation of being suspended between two worlds, neither of which seems completely real. Your eyes open to the same ceiling as always, the same room, the same light filtered through the curtains, but something fundamental has dissolved in the invisible architecture of your existence. It's not depression exactly, though sometimes you wonder if it would be easier if it were. It's not burnout, though the exhaustion is real. It's more subtle, more bewildering, as if someone had changed the frequency of your life's radio station while you slept, and now you're only picking up static where there used to be clear music. The people around you continue their routines, apparently untouched by this seismic shift that only you seem to feel, and this amplifies the sense of existential isolation that permeates your days like a persistent fog that refuses to lift even under the brightest sun. If you're here now, if these words are finding you at this exact moment, then you need to subscribe to this channel and hit the notification bell, because what I'm about to reveal in the next few minutes about what's really happening to you is going to completely change your understanding of this strange and sacred period you're going through. You try to explain to yourself what's happening, but words seem inadequate, too small to contain the vastness of the emptiness that's settled where certainty used to be. Your projects, those that once burned with urgency in your veins, now seem to belong to someone else, to a version of yourself you can barely remember being. Emails pile up unanswered, not from procrastination, but because, on a fundamental level, you no longer see the point in responding. Conversations that once flowed naturally now require conscious effort, as if you were translating from a language you partially forgot how to speak. You smile at the right moments, answer when asked, execute the necessary movements of daily life, but inside there's this echo, this hollow space where your identity used to reside with crystal clarity. It's not that you've lost yourself completely. It's more complex and disturbing than that. It's as if you were simultaneously present and absent, watching your own life through a fogged glass that distorts everything just enough to make the familiar unrecognizable. What's most bewildering is that you can't point to a specific event that caused this change. There was no dramatic tragedy, no identifiable moment of rupture. It was more like a gradual fading, like a photograph left in the sun too long, losing definition until the edges between you and the void became indistinguishable. Your friends ask if you're okay, and you say yes, because how do you explain that you're simultaneously fine and completely displaced from the reality everyone else seems to inhabit so easily? How do you articulate that you feel like you're waiting for something you can't name, an imminent arrival or departure that hovers on the periphery of your consciousness, like a storm forming on the horizon? This peculiar paralysis has a different quality from anything you've experienced before. It's not the creative block you know, where inspiration temporarily dries up. It's not the familiar procrastination, where you know what you need to do but resist. It's something more fundamental, more cellular, as if every atom of your being were in the process of reconfiguration, and you were conscious enough to feel the discomfort, but not enough to understand the purpose. And the truth, no one is telling you the revelation that will reframe this entire impossible moment is this: the existential void isn't a bug. It's a feature. It's the system itself updating to accommodate something your conscious mind can't yet process. You're going through what quantum physics and ancient spiritual traditions recognize as an essential phase of all genuine transformation, a territory that has many names, but one function: to dissolve what you were, so that what you're becoming can emerge. What's happening to you now has a name that science whispers and ancient traditions always knew, though each uses its own language to describe the indescribable. You're not broken, a failure, or lost, even though every cell in your body might be screaming the opposite right now. Using the metaphor of quantum superposition from physics, we can understand that you're in a state where multiple possibilities exist simultaneously until observation collapses them all into a single reality. Except in your case, It's not a subatomic particle navigating this liminal territory. It's your entire identity, your sense of self, your personal reality matrix that's suspended between what was and what's about to be. This void you feel as devastating emptiness is, in reality, completely and absolutely the opposite of what your mind interprets. Its fullness so vast that your nervous system, trained to process only the familiar and linear, interprets it as absence. Think about how the human eye can't see ultraviolet, not because the light doesn't exist, but because our receptors weren't calibrated for that frequency. The void works exactly the same way, presenting a spectrum of potentiality so broad that your current perception processes it as nothing, when in reality it's everything existing simultaneously before crystallization into specific form. Every spiritual tradition developed a name for this phenomenon because it's as universal as it is fundamental to human evolution. Buddhists call it Bardo, the space between death and rebirth where consciousness floats without anchor. Medieval alchemists knew it as Nigredo, the necessary blackening before gold can emerge from raw matter. Christian mystics called it the dark night of the soul, that interior desert where even God seems absent, not from abandonment, but because the old way of perceiving the divine is dying so a vaster one can be born. Even Carl Jung, navigating between science and spirit, mapped this territory as the death of the ego that precedes genuine individuation, the process of integrating the conscious and unconscious aspects of the psyche. Contemporary neuroscience adds another revealing layer to this ancient understanding. Your brain, that magnificently complex organ that consumes 20% of your body's energy just to keep you functional, operates through established neural networks that are literally physical grooves created by repetition. When you enter this existential void, what's happening at the synaptic level is a form of massive neural reorganization. Synaptic pruning, a scientifically documented process where unnecessary neural connections are eliminated to make the brain more efficient, normally happens mainly during deep sleep or specific phases of development. But metaphorically speaking, you're experiencing something similar while awake and conscious, and that's why it feels so profoundly disorienting. Your brain is simultaneously processing the dismantling of old neural pathways while seeking to build new routes that aren't yet complete enough for you to navigate with confidence. It's like being in a city where all the familiar streets have been blocked for reconstruction, but the detours haven't been clearly marked yet. Now, it's important to distinguish here between the metaphorical application of these scientific concepts and literal biological processes. When we talk about quantum superposition applied to human consciousness, we're using a powerful analogy to understand subjective experience, not describing a literal quantum mechanism occurring at macroscopic scale in the brain. Similarly, the neural reorganization you're experiencing, while real in terms of subtle changes in brain connectivity, isn't literally the same massive synaptic pruning process that occurs in infant development. These are conceptual bridges that help us understand and validate a profoundly real experience that conventional language fails to capture adequately. And it's precisely this experience, this sacred void between identities, that's preparing you for a transformation beyond what your current mind can conceive. Quantum physics offers a powerful metaphorical language for understanding your current state, though it's crucial to recognize that we're using these concepts as inspiring analogies, not as literal descriptions of neurobiological processes. When Werner Heisenberg discovered the uncertainty principle, he was describing subatomic particles, but inadvertently gave us a perfect metaphor for understanding the fundamental mechanics of all human transformation. The principle states that you cannot simultaneously know the position and momentum of a particle with absolute precision. Applied metaphorically to your experience, this is exactly what you're living on an existential scale. You can't determine where you are psychologically because you're into deeper movement, and you can't feel where you're going because you're too suspended in the present to have perspective. This isn't a limitation, it's the necessary condition for a genuine change to happen. If you knew exactly where you are and where you're going, you'd be trapped in a deterministic trajectory that would make any real transformation impossible. The concept of quantum decoherence, when used as metaphor, illuminates another crucial aspect of your current void. In quantum systems, decoherence happens when a system in superposition interacts with the environment in a way that forces collapse into a defined state. Translating this analogy to the human experience of transformation, before you can establish a new coherence of identity, there first has to be a dismantling of the previous coherence. In practical and visceral terms, this means your sense of self, your identity, your fundamental beliefs about reality need to first lose their previous organizational structure before a new organization can emerge. The void is literally the period of maximum psychological incoherence, where old patterns have been dissolved, but new ones haven't crystallized yet. You're living in the exact moment between exhalation and inhalation on an existential scale. Using wave function collapse theory as a conceptual framework, not as literal description, we can understand something revolutionary about your experience. In the quantum model, a particle exists as a probability wave until the moment of observation, when it instantaneously collapses into a particle with specific location. But what determines which of the infinite possibilities it collapses into? The answer lies in the quality and frequency of the observation itself. Applied philosophically to your current situation in the void, this suggests you're not just passively waiting for a new reality to emerge. The quality of your presence, the specific frequency of your consciousness during this transition period, is metaphorically influencing which version of yourself you'll consolidate into when this process completes. Every moment of conscious presence in the void isn't just survival, it's active participation in forming your next iteration. Your body has been trying to tell you something crucial about this void, but you were taught from childhood to ignore its most fundamental language in favor of the mind's noise. That anxiety that comes from nowhere, that seems to have no identifiable trigger and makes you question your sanity. While it's important not to minimize symptoms that may require clinical attention, often what we call anxiety during deep transition periods can be understood as disorganized psychological energy seeking a new pattern of coherence, like boiling water seeking the form of steam, but still trapped in the tension between states. Your nervous system is processing significant changes, and what you interpret as anxiety simply be the physical sensation of that internal reorganization. Every time your heart races for no apparent reason, every time your hands tremble subtly, every time you feel that inexplicable pressure in your chest that no medical exam can explain, your body may be processing massive amounts of psychological change that your conscious mind can't fully articulate. The HeartMath Institute has extensively documented how the heart generates an electromagnetic field approximately 60 times greater in electrical amplitude and 100 times stronger magnetically than the brain. During periods of deep transition at your current void, this cardiac field is in the process of recalibration. That feeling of tightness in your chest that sometimes wakes you at 3 in the morning, it can be interpreted as your cardiac system trying to establish resonance with a new emotional and psychological frequency, expanding beyond the limits that previously contained it. It's crucial to note that we're talking here about subtle changes in the body's bioelectric field, not medical conditions requiring clinical attention. If you experience persistent or concerning physical symptoms, always consult a qualified healthcare professional. The mental confusion that makes you forget simple words in the middle of conversations, that transforms previously automatic tasks into challenges requiring total concentration, may not be cognitive decline, but your brain reorganizing its processing priorities. During periods of intense psychological change, cognitive resources are diverted from normal executive functions toward deep internal processing. It's as if your mental computer were running a system update in the background, leaving fewer resources available for everyday tasks. The existential weight you carry, that invisible gravity that makes every movement harder than it should be, as if the atmosphere itself had become denser around you, can be understood metaphorically as psychological compression. Just as carbon needs extreme pressure to transform into diamond, your psyche is under similar transformative pressure, though at a psychological rather than physical level. The practice I'm going to share now isn't another manifestation protocol promising results in record time. It's not a technique imported from some ancient tradition repackaged for modern consumption. It's a psychological stabilization exercise that can be useful specifically during transition periods, developed through the synthesis of principles from psychology, neuroscience, and contemplative practices. Start by finding a space where you can be without interruption for 10 minutes. Sit or stand comfortably, keeping your spine erect to facilitate deep breathing. Close your eyes not to escape the world, but to amplify perception of the inner world. Place both hands over your heart, recognizing this gesture as a way to bring conscious attention to the body's emotional center. Breathe naturally at first, without forcing any specific pattern, just observing how air enters and exits, how your chest rises and falls under your hands. This initial observation without interference is crucial because it establishes you as witness to the process, not controller of it. Now, with each inhalation, instead of imagining you're pulling something inward, feel that you're expanding internally, creating space within yourself. With each exhalation, allow any tension to dissolve naturally. After establishing this rhythm, add a simple but profound internal recognition. The words can be adapted to what resonates with you, but something like "I trust this transformation process" or "I allow this necessary transition" can be helpful. Repeat these words internally not as forced affirmation, but as gentle recognition of what's happening. The HeartMath Institute has demonstrated that heart coherence practices like this can measurably alter heart rate variability, shifting the nervous system from sympathetic mode, fight or flight, to parasympathetic rest and regeneration, creating physiological conditions more conducive to processing deep psychological changes. Continue this practice for at least 5 minutes, ideally 10. When you feel it's time to complete, slowly remove your hands from your heart and return your breathing to normal pattern before opening your eyes. The integration of a deep transformation won't announce its arrival with fireworks or dramatic epiphanies. It begins with subtle, almost imperceptible changes in the quality of your daily experience. You might notice it first in the small synchronicities that begin to accumulate. The book that falls from the shelf open to a relevant page. The person you were thinking about who appears unexpectedly. The song that starts playing with lyrics that seem to have been written for this moment in your life. While we can interpret these events as coincidences, they can also be seen as indicators that you're more attuned to the subtle patterns of life around you. The HeartMath Institute has documented interesting phenomena related to cardiac intuition, where physiological responses seem to anticipate future events by seconds. During integration phases, after periods of deep transition, many people report increased intuitive sensitivity. You might start feeling things before they happen, not as mystical premonition, but as a form of subtle somatic knowing. Your phone rings and you already have a sense of who it might be. You have an impulse to take a different route and discover you avoided a gridlock. While science is still exploring the mechanisms behind these phenomena, they're consistently reported experiences by people who've gone through significant psychological transformations. The change in how other people respond to you can be initially disconcerting. Without you consciously changing your behavior, interactions begin to have a different quality. Some relationships that seem solid may naturally distance themselves, not through conflict, but simply because the resonance has changed. New relationships may emerge with a different quality, less based on compensatory needs and more on genuine affinity. You're not doing anything different consciously, but something in your presence has changed, and the social world around you is responding to that subtle shift. Biologically, integration can manifest as changes in energy, sleep, and even food preferences, not because you've consciously decided to change these aspects, but because your system is naturally recalibrating. Sleep may become more regenerative even when it lasts fewer hours. You might discover that certain foods you always consumed no longer seem appropriate, while others become inexplicably attractive. These are signals that your body is adjusting to a new internal balance. The question that emerges after understanding the mechanics of this transformative void is profoundly practical. How do you live when you're no longer who you were, but haven't yet fully crystallized into who you're becoming? The answer isn't in waiting for the process to complete, because psychological transformation is a continuous process, not a single event with clearly defined beginning, middle, and end. You learn to live in a state of continuous becoming, maintaining stability, not through fixed identity, but through conscious presence with the process itself. Living through this transitions, making decisions based not on who you were or what worked before, but based on your present intuition, even when this means making choices that seem irrational to your previous logic. It means trusting the subtle signals of your body and intuition more than the strategies of the conditioned mind. When doubts arise, and they will because they're a natural part of the process, you recognize them as echoes of the old pattern, testing whether it still has power over you, and you respond not with resistance, but with gentle continuation of operating from the new internal space that's emerging. This new way of being requires a reformulation of what it means to succeed, progress, be alive. Success is no longer necessarily accumulating external achievements, but maintaining internal coherence through changes. Progress isn't linear movement toward predefined goals, but spiral deepening of your capacity to be present with what is. Being alive is no longer just surviving or thriving in the conventional sense, but consciously participating in the continuous process of growth and transformation. The people around you may not understand this change. Some may question your choices or project their own insecurities onto your transformation. That's not your problem to solve. Your responsibility is to maintain the integrity of your own process, to be authentic with your experience without necessarily needing others to validate or understand it. Some will resonate with your new presence and be inspired in their own journey. Others will find it uncomfortable and pull away. Both responses are natural and serve the larger process of relational realignment. The moment you realize you've traversed the most intense phase of the void doesn't come as dramatic celebration, but as a deep silence that settles in the spaces that were once filled with existential noise. It's like the moment after a storm when you realize the rain has stopped, not because you were paying attention, but because the absence of sound becomes more present than the sound ever was. You're doing something ordinary when the realization gently passes through you. You're no longer waiting. You're no longer struggling. You simply are. And this being has a completely different quality than before. You've reached the end of this transmission, but the beginning of something infinitely greater, because now you carry the map of the territory so many fear to cross. The void is no longer a threat whispered in the dark corners of your psyche, but a recognized portal, a rite of passage you can choose to traverse consciously whenever life demands an upgrade your current systems can't process. This isn't information to be filed away in the mental library of interesting concepts. It's living technology that needs to be embodied through practice, felt through the body, verified through direct experience. If these words found you at the exact moment you most needed to hear them, if you felt your internal field reorganize while receiving this transmission, then you've just witnessed synchronicity in action. Subscribe to this channel now and turn on all notifications by clicking the bell, because every video I share is calibrated to find you exactly where you are in your evolutionary journey. And now, as an act of anchoring this new understanding, go to the comments and declare, I am consciously navigating the void, not as hopeful affirmation, but as declaration of psychological sovereignty, as recognition that you're no longer a victim of life's transitions, but a conscious navigator of them.